purchase it and have people willing to come tour this home. In 1988, 7 bodies were dug up in the yard of this home, and the home belonged to Dorthea Puente at this point in time in 1988. So I'm going to put up a picture of Dorthea on the screen now, and I think right away she just looks like this sweet, frail old lady, but you're going to find out that she was very far from that. So I'm going to just very briefly go through Dorthea's upbringing, very briefly, and kind of just move through how Dorthea came to be running this house of horrors where 7 bodies were found. So Dorthea was born in San Bernardino, California. In 1929, she lost both of her parents at a very young age and basically ended up in an orphanage. Her movements as a child were tracked, and it was evident that she kind of was passed around quite a bit, and she never really had any time to develop any sort of relationships with any of her caregivers. So at no point did she really have any sort of mom or dad figure. After an extremely rough upbringing, Dorthea went on to marry 3 separate times by the time she was in her 30s. Also, by this point, she had been to prison for forging checks and began dabbling in sex work. At some point during her sex work, she discovered the very low amount of requirements that was necessary to become a caregiver. And that's when Dorthea Puente began renting an apartment at 1426 F Street. She turned this home into a boarding house and began renting it to tenants. Her tenants were basically adults that required a caregiver, required somebody to actually look after them. So some of them maybe were mentally unstable or just needed extra care, and I think some were maybe just injured, some didn't have anywhere else to go. It was a varied crowd of who lived in this home with her. So pictured on the screen now is a woman named Ruth Monroe. So Ruth came across Dorthea through mutual friends, and Dorthea and Ruth then ended up becoming close friends. Dorthea even pushed Ruth to open a little cafe to kind of help sustain Ruth and give her a livable wage. Eventually, Ruth's husband passed away from cancer, and Ruth could not stand the thought of living alone. So Dorthea had the perfect solution. She already had a boarding house, so Ruth could come live with her at 1426 F Street. So in 1982, Ruth Monroe moved into the old Victorian home with Dorthea. Barely 2 weeks later, Ruth died inside that home on 1426 F Street. Ruth's son recalls the last 2 weeks of his mother's life. He worked nearby, and he would stop by every single day. For the last 2 weeks of her life, every single evening he would stop by to see his mother. He specifies that the last 3 days before her passing, that his mom seemed really off. He described this off as she always had a drink in her hand, and she didn't ever drink, so that was weird, and she kind of seemed like she was getting sick, but he basically said, Dorthea's gonna take care of you, and you're gonna be okay, you'll get through this. When he questioned his mother about the drink, he said that it was something Dorthea had made up for her to calm her nerves. Closing in on Ruth's last day of life, her son noticed how things had taken a turn for the worse. She could barely talk, barely walk, basically bedridden, and again, he said, don't worry, we'll get you taken care of. Dorthea's gonna take care of you. And the next day, Ruth passed. So Dorthea said something that would stun Ruth's family. No, she didn't say that Ruth's health deteriorated overnight. She didn't say that she succumbed to her illness. She told the family that Ruth had taken her own life. So around this same time, Dorthea got into more trouble for forging signatures on social security checks of some of her tenants. So she actually was sent to prison and was paroled and came back to 1426 F Street in 1985. So she spent about 3 years in prison, and so 1985 would be about 3 years after Ruth's passing. So Dorthea continued to run this boarding house and allowed people to stay in the home with her. She knew that people staying with her were in a bad patch. She knew that they didn't have a lot of family that was obviously caring for them, otherwise they would be with that family. And most importantly, she knew that they were all incredibly vulnerable. So Dorthea continued running this boarding house into 1988. So once she got out of prison, she ran the house up until 1988. So what's so important about 1988? Well, in November of 1988, a social worker lost touch with a man by the name of Montoya. And Bert was a 51-year-old and a tenant of Dorthea Puente. She called in and made a missing persons report for Bert, and police were actually very quick to jump on this and investigate the missing persons report. So this obviously brought them to Dorthea's house because he was under her care, and 2 police officers as well as Dorthea's parole officer went to pay Dorthea a visit, basically, and before they even made it to Dorthea's house, they got a tip about mounds of dirt that they had seen in Dorthea's yard. So they thought that was a little strange. They have a missing person and there's like some weird mounds of dirt. They're gonna bring some shovels. And that's what they did. They brought shovels along with them. So police recall the first thing that Dorthea said when she answered the door, and that was, quote, "I was expecting you guys." So police are allowed inside and they search the inside of the home, not super in depth, just kind of like a light looking around, seeing if anything's out of place while another officer chats with her. It was clear that they were itching to get to the backyard though. Dorthea was very forthcoming until the officers brought up digging in the yard. She still remained pretty stoic and polite, but she offered as many excuses or alternate suggestions that would hopefully get them to stay away from digging in her yard. So eventually, police get her to agree to dig, and police dig for a while with their shovels and come across a human femur bone. And this entire time, Dorthea's actually like up on a balcony, looking down, just like watching police dig in her yard. When they found this femur bone, police say they remember to a T exactly how Dorthea reacted, and she covered her mouth and was like, "Oh my gosh, is that what I think it is? And it can't be," and was just acting very shocked and surprised. This really didn't fool the police. It is this old, fragile lady, but they could tell she was still acting weird. They brought her in for questioning, and Dorthea refuted everything. She said, "I went to jail multiple times. So many other people lived in this home. There were 3 years that people lived in this home that I wasn't even in the home." But the kicker is that the individual, Bert Montoya, that brought the police to her home, to her doorstep, didn't disappear 3 years ago. He had just disappeared. So, and no, they don't have him. They don't have his body. They don't know where he is, but they were willing to bet he was in that backyard. A huge digging operation ensues at the home. Dorthea actually remains inside. She's not technically under arrest or anything. Eventually, she asks police if she can go to a hotel a couple blocks away for a coffee to calm her nerves. And so an officer escorts her over there, and to me, I was like, coffee does not calm your nerves. That is so weird, but to each their own. On the screen now, you can see an image captured of the moment Dorthea was being escorted away to go get the coffee. So the officer that escorted her hurried back to help dig. I don't know if he was supposed to do that or not, but this was actually when a second body was discovered, right when I guess this officer was on his way back or got back. I don't know, but everyone in the excavation operation instantly knew in their gut they needed to get Dorthea back into an interrogation room and find out what she knows. But they quickly learn that Dorthea was down the hotel. When they went back there, she was no longer there. She never got coffee. She actually called up a cab and left. So now the officers are kind of having to split where their efforts go. Some of them stay at the digging operation. Some of them are now trying to locate Dorthea. And regardless, the excavating team continues, and then a team tried to locate Dorthea. Around the same time that all of this is happening, another witness comes forward to let them know that Dorthea had actually paid him to dig holes in her yard, and she said this was so she could bury trash, but I think we obviously know that that's not the case. And because of this witness, they could actually direct the team, the digging team, to exactly where he dug those holes for Dorthea. And after this, bodies after body after body were being found. Ultimately, 7 bodies were discovered in Dorthea Puente's home, but some of the bodies were missing their heads, hands, or feet. And even to this day, some of those body parts were literally never found. They're still unknown, the location of them. Dorthea only made it 5 days before police found her in Los Angeles, and they had a lot of questions for her. As you can imagine, just like before, Dorthea was not ready to speak or give up any information. She declined to give a statement, and she was actually booked in jail at this point. The identification process was incredibly taxing, but all 7 bodies were identified, and the team that identified the bodies, they are obviously very proud that they were able to, but this was a hard process given it's 1988, given these individuals are maybe not cared for the best or haven't seen family in a while, but they were all identified. They were able to do that. And Bert Montoya was one of the 7 bodies found in the yard, so thanks to that social worker for reporting him missing, the investigation started before even more people were killed. So what everyone is thinking right now is, how the heck did this old, frail lady kill all these people? The medical reports basically showed that the cause of death for every single victim was identical. Every single body had traces of Dalmane, and that's a sleeping drug. And when this drug is mixed with alcohol, it becomes incredibly, incredibly deadly. And if you think back to Ruth Monroe, who was not one of the 7 bodies in the yard, she had that alcoholic beverage that her son kept seeing her hold in the days leading up to her death. So now, with that information, they're like, okay, she's definitely putting this sleeping drug into their drink and then killing them that way. So I just want to also take a moment to say that sleeping drug was not prescribed to any of the 7 victims, but it was prescribed to Dorthea. So she had access to this drug, and she had access to these people. Given this information, it seems incredibly likely that Ruth Monroe was Dorthea's first victim. And once I kind of went through this information, she didn't die right away. She was getting sicker and sicker. So I'm wondering if Dorthea was playing with dosages, how much she should put into the beverage or whatever. I'm not really sure if that is true. That's just kind of something that crossed my mind. Eventually, Dorthea is charged with 9 murders, and that is the 7 people from her yard and Ruth Monroe. But that's only 8. So the 9th person that she was charged with murdering would be a 77-year-old man named Everson Gilmouth. And this is probably going to make you just as mad as me, but this man had actually become pen pals with Dorthea when she served 3 years in prison between Ruth's murder and the other 7 murders. And Everson was actually the individual who went and picked Dorthea up from prison and drove her back to her F Street home. So he was friends with her, he trusted her, he went to get her and bring her home. He actually became close enough with her to decide to move in with Dorthea, which this decision would obviously prove to be deadly. tried to reach him, though, Dorthea would answer, and Dorthea would give excuses that no, Everson's out, he can't come to the phone. They never got to speak with him. Everson was not found in the yard. He was actually found in a homemade coffin near Sacramento River in 1986. So this is 2 years prior to all of the rest of the bodies being found. So they actually found Everson and were unable to identify him until 1988, when this case just broke wide open. Armed with everything that they have against Dorthea, a trial began about 4 years after she was taken into custody. Strangely, Dorthea admitted to burying all 7 bodies in her yard, as well as collecting their social security checks for herself. So, she didn't kill them. She doesn't know who killed them, or is not willing to talk about who killed them, but nope, she buried them. This frail old lady buried them. Anyway, the prosecution knew even though they had decent evidence against Dorthea, they would still have to convince the jury that a 64-year-old woman could manage to kill 7 people undetected by herself, move them from where she killed them, and put them in her yard, again undetected. Ultimately, the jury decided, yeah, there's enough evidence, she did this, she's guilty. But she was only found guilty of 3 of the 9 murders, and the 3 were all individuals found in her backyard. And this is so perplexing. It's perplexing to me. It stumped the victim's family. It stumped the prosecution. Every single victim died the same way. Why are only 3 of the 7? You'd think at least 7 of the 9 she would get convicted of killing, but I'm really not sure what it came down to. But I guess only 3, for whatever reason, were decided to have been her victims. A mistrial was declared for the other 6 charges because the jury could not come to a conclusion. I think it was 1 juror, actually, that could not agree with everybody else. And Dorthea was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Either way, she's probably gonna die in prison. So she killed her tenants and friends for one reason and one reason only: to steal their money. Literally, this was all for money. So one of the most selfish, heartless acts a human could do, take another person's life, and to just have done that for money is just so, it's just disgusting. I don't know. Greed apparently can drive people crazy. So experts discuss the improbability that Dorthea could have done these actions alone. It's a mystery, but Dorthea is a small woman and she's elderly, so it really is unlikely that Dorthea would have been able to move 150 plus pound bodies all on her own. She probably didn't even weigh 150 pounds, so you're telling me this old lady is moving people? And specifically, Bert Montoya was a larger man. He probably was almost 200 plus pounds, so it's very unlikely that Dorthea was acting alone. People talk about who an accomplice could be. Police have a very good idea of who an accomplice could be. Or could have been. I don't think they're really pursuing that. Maybe just because they can't prove anything, but a lot of people say they think that Dorthea had other people, other tenants inside the home helping her, basically because if they didn't help her, they'd be the ones buried, and it was better to help than to die, and she may have roped them in that way. So 20 years after Dorthea was arrested, she still maintained her innocence. She still said, I did not murder those people, but I don't know, she, I guess, claimed to have buried them. Super weird to have admitted to that, but not the murdering part. You would think she would say she had nothing to do with anything, but in 2011, 82-year-old Dorthea Puente died in prison. So the murderous landlady took the life of 9 people, and I'm actually going to go and take a moment to just say those names, so and put up accompanying pictures so we can just remember them. So we have Ruth Monroe, Everson Gilmouth, Dorothy Brudos because of that one juror, but in everybody's hearts, in everybody's minds, we all know that she was guilty of all 9. So with that, that's all that I have for today's case. Today we are jumping straight into the Jerry Brudos shoe fetish slayer case, and this is a serial murder, serial killer. I think these make more sense when I start not with the early childhood and background, but I'm gonna start at the time where Jerry Brudos started this rampage, and I will then follow that up with some of the big things from his childhood and from his early life that I think make more sense to talk about after. I do want to make one small note though, that at the young age of 5, Jerry had already started an obsession with women's shoes. He would bring home pairs of women's shoes, and it would infuriate his mother. That is one point I did want to talk about at the beginning. But to start us off, I want to talk about who 30-year-old Jerry Brudos was around the time he committed these crimes. So at this time, Jerry was married to a woman named Darcy, and the couple had 2 children, and friends kind of suggest that this family was fairly normal and that Jerry refrained from things like drinking and smoking and even the use of profanity and cursing and stuff like that. So he seemed like an innocent man. He didn't do some of the things that the other 30-year-old men were doing in his neighborhood. But Jerry, however, harbored some different secrets. He had lots of sexual fantasies and things that definitely spilled over into his marriage. So he would request things from Darcy, like to clean the house naked, walking around cleaning the house in just a pair of heels. And Darcy was his wife. She complied. She was like, okay, this is maybe a little weird, but it's not that bad, and if it makes him happy, okay. So she complied, at least for a while. And it really did seem like Darcy was Jerry's outlet for some of his weird fantasies that he had. But after they had been married a couple of years, Darcy decided to do those weird things less, and it may have also been that it progressively got weirder. I think this makes my P's really kind of sound fuzzy. Anyway, so she started to not give in to things he would ask her to do. She would even give him less attention. Their kids were getting older and required a little bit more attention. So his demands, that's my dog, his demands just became too much work, and they were weird. Jerry's outlet, that was Darcy, was kind of pulling away, and he felt he really needed to express himself with or without Darcy as his outlet, aka he needed a new outlet to express his tendencies. And at first, this outlet was searching for women's shoes and undergarments. He would actually break into women's houses to fulfill this need, and I believe on a few occasions they would wake up and he would hit them or assault them in some way, still get what he needed, whether that was shoes or undergarments or whatever. So he ended up turning this tendency to break into the extreme in 1967 when he was walking downtown on the prowl for, I don't know, a woman to follow around or something, but he spotted a pair of shoes that really caught his eye, and this time the shoes were being worn by a woman, and in this moment Jerry decides to follow her home. He's followed other women before. This isn't really unusual for him, and he waits. I believe she lived in an apartment, so he waited outside to figure out which apartment was hers, and then he decided to break in and steal the shoes that he had been eyeing. And she woke up in the middle of this, and he decided, I believe he just panicked and decided to strangle her. And from what I read with this story, her name is not public. I don't believe he murdered her. He strangled her, so she was unconscious, and then sexual assault warning. He decided to rape the woman and made sure to grab the shoes on the way out before departing her home. So, like I said, I don't believe, she's not listed as a victim of Jerry Brudos, so I believe her identity is more just kept private, because I mean, she is a victim of Jerry Brudos, but not a murder victim of Jerry Brudos, so I believe that's why her name is not shared. But in January of 1968, so this is the following year, Jerry's next victim showed up on his front steps, and this is 19-year-old Linda Slauson, and I'm going to insert a picture of her. She stopped by the Brudos household. She was selling encyclopedias, and Jerry answered the door and saw his opportunity was standing right in front of him, so he ended up pretending to be interested in buying an encyclopedia. And I do want to note, his children and wife were upstairs and home at this point, and when he lured Linda inside, while he's like putting on this show of acting like he wanted to purchase an encyclopedia, he ends up hitting Linda in the head and strangling her to death. And he ended up stashing her body in the garage, and he later cut off her foot and stored it in the freezer. The foot was later sickeningly used to model some of the shoes that Jerry Brudos had collected over time, and eventually he tied Linda's body to a car engine and dropped it in the, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Willamette River. And that was his first murder victim. Definitely not his first victim, because he had assaulted and or raped other women in the past, but this was his first murdered victim. And in November 1968, we are 10 months after Linda's murder. Jerry's next victim was Jan Whitney, who accepted a ride from him after her car had broken down. So this also, to me, seems like an opportunity, because Linda was an opportunity. Jan is now, I guess, kind of an opportunity. He may have been trying to stalk and find somebody when he came across Jan, but he used this opportunity to, again, strangle the woman, sexually assault her, and he ended up keeping Jan's body and performed acts of necrophilia on her, as well as mutilating some of her private parts and make molds of them. I believe he used the molds as a paperweight. That is very strange. In March of 1969, now we are 4 months after Jan's murder and a little bit over a year after Linda's, Jerry dresses as a woman to aid in his kidnapping plan for a woman named Karen Sprinkler. And I do want to make note that there's now less time between murders. The first two had 10 months in between. This one has 4, and this one also, he's out searching to kidnap. It's not an opportunity thing. Like, he's like, this is what I wanted to go do. And so he holds Karen at gunpoint in a parking lot and abducts her, taking her back to his garage. I would only have to imagine that his family is home. Where else would they be? He took pictures of Karen while forcing her to put on certain outfits or certain undergarments. She was sexually assaulted, and he murdered her via hanging strangulation from a pulley in his garage. Like his other victims, he performed acts of necrophilia as well as mutilating more of her private parts, and she was tied to a car engine and thrown into a river to dispose of her. So he's clearly advancing in his crimes, I would say. He's going out to search for victims. He's keeping them alive for longer. He's bringing them back to his house while they're alive. He's taking pictures, and he's like having this incriminating evidence that he's holding on to. I think he might be feeling like he's not going to get caught or something, but he also continues to keep bodies from the victims in his garage. This is also the point where he's not allowing his wife or children into the garage without permission. I can't imagine that he would really allow them with permission either. He has to have had so much incriminating evidence in that garage. But regardless, 4 weeks following the murder of Karen, so again we see that progression. We're now into weeks following that he's seeking out more people, more victims. But 4 weeks following the murder of Karen, 22-year-old Linda Saley would be his next victim. He abducts her, brings her back to his garage, where he also sexually assaults her, strangles and disposes of her in, again, the Willamette River after mutilating her body. So now I'm going to detail the finding of Jerry. It's not very long. They track him down pretty easily, and basically the police find both Linda Saley and Karen's bodies. So Linda Saley is his most recent victim. Linda Lawson was his first victim, and they find their bodies badly mutilated and weighed down inside different bodies of water. And after interviewing many Oregon State students, they begin to start to hear some stories, and it's talked about that a Vietnam vet was like trying to date a few women in the area, and that one of these women that he was trying to date apparently said that he was talking about putting women into different bodies of water, and that there were some suggestions about him strangling different women, and that was enough for the police to be like, okay, we need to find this guy. And it really did not take them long to connect these stories back to Jerry Brudos, and using one of the women to try to like set up a date with him. Basically they were able to retrieve him and question him. Because it was set up, they were able to get him and question him, and it really wasn't long that they got a search warrant as well, and all of the evidence was found. That was the trophies, the pictures, and they were certain that Jerry was their killer. And during the interrogations, Jerry ends up confessing to all of the murders, as well as the earlier assaults on women and other attempted abductions. Jerry goes to trial and is found guilty for the murders of Karen Sprinkler, Jan Whitney, and Linda Saley, but he was not convicted for Linda Lawson's murder, as her body was never found. Jerry ends up dying of natural causes on March 28th, 2006, at the age of 56. That's young. I think that's very young for natural causes, but I often think, okay, so how did this person get this way? And that's why I'm going to follow this up with a detail of some of the major events and like different red flags that we can now, hindsight, we can see that Jerry had in his early life maturing into adulthood. And so I did mention his obsession with shoes, women's shoes, at the age of 5, which again was met with outrage from Jerry's mother. And because of her obvious disgust in these actions, it actually made him want to do it more. So he just got better at hiding them. So he still continued to steal shoes, which turned into also undergarments at a young age that he would steal. And he just got better at hiding them so his mother wouldn't find them and get mad at him. So Jerry's mother, Eileen, was fairly hostile towards Jerry. She already had one child and one son, and she really wanted a daughter, and then Jerry was born, obviously not a daughter, and she was very loving towards Jerry's older brother, but just incredibly critical towards Jerry. And I think it can be said that they probably had a very dysfunctional relationship, and this is something he did when he was in first grade, but he stole his teacher's high heels from her desk. That, I don't know, it's like, that I think speaks volumes about like the dysfunction going on inside of Jerry's brain. But when a teenage girl visited the home, Jerry tried to steal her shoes straight off of her feet. I think she was like asleep or something on the couch, and she ended up waking up and being like, "What are you doing?" So it was to, quote, keep women as sex slaves. And he then abducted a teenage girl, assaulted her, and forced her to pose for nude photos. And after this, he was caught. They found out that he did this and basically just sent him to a psychiatric ward. And it was here that experts noted his hatred towards women, and in particular his hatred towards his mother. And he was released even after divulging his desires to keep women in a freezer for his own sexual arousals. They let him go. I don't know why or who would let someone go after that, especially given what they had already done to somebody. I don't get that, but okay, so he was released and ends up graduating high school. He meets Darcy after being discharged from the army. I can only imagine the reasons he could have been discharged, but I don't know the reasons. And the two dated, Darcy and Jerry dated, and eventually married and had children. And then there's a 10-year gap where Jerry's tendencies either seem to be subsided and like funneled through Darcy as an outlet, or there's just like he didn't admit, or they didn't have evidence on things that he did, like stealing shoes or anything. But I do want to say that 10-year gap is incredibly strange. I think it makes sense a little bit because he now has Darcy. He was dating and marrying and creating a life with Darcy. But someone that is like so messed up at clearly such a young age, I find that 10-year gap to still be really weird. And also, maybe Darcy just didn't want to admit to some of the weird things that like went on between those two. Which, I mean, if I was her, I probably wouldn't either. So I don't know. I'm just a little bit confused with the 10-year gap thing. I would like to know more, but we don't. And so as the marriage became strained, Jerry became a killer, and we know what follows because I gave all that information earlier. But Jerry took the lives of Linda Slauson, Jan Whitney, Karen Sprinkler, and Linda Saley. He attempted to abduct and assault many others. And thanks to the Oregon University students keeping a keen eye and being aware of their surroundings, they were able to narrow Jerry down pretty quickly once they found two of the bodies and stop him before he could kill more women. And I truly believe he wouldn't have stopped. He was just feeding an obsession that was clearly getting worse as far as what he was doing, and how the time between, because we started with that 10-month gap and then we were down to weeks. So I could only imagine that he was going to continue, and it was just going to be an everyday thing for him unless he was put away. And unfortunately, we were not able to apprehend him faster, and four lives were taken, and honestly many others ruined from his actions. Like, just imagine even being someone who wakes up and someone's stealing your undergarments and shoes and trying to either abduct you or strangle you. That messes you up. That messes you up for the rest of your life. And to me, that's also, like, obviously that's still a victim of his, but that is just terrible as well. They have to deal with that now for the rest of their lives. But that is the main details of Jerry Brudos. I feel like it may be safe to say that if he had a little more stability, maybe a little more compassion, then maybe he would have turned out differently. But he would, like, 5 is so young to have started this shoe obsession that just snowballed into something so sick and terrible. But it does kind of make you sad and think, like, what if he had stability? What if he had compassion in his life? What if he had a loving mother? I don't really know what with the father. Actually, I believe I saw that they were divorced, so maybe it was like a single mother household situation. But it's sad, it's sick, and at least he was put away. And yeah, like I said, he died of natural causes at age 56. That's kind of weird too, but that is all that I have. So I was initially looking into doing another serial killer case, and I came across this one, and this video is actually what made me decide to move forward with like a full research on this and to cover this case. It just broke my heart seeing this victim's father's face, and it was, I don't know, it was just really heartbreaking, and I just really wanted to cover it. So I will be covering the terrible acts carried out by serial killer Michael Madison, as well as an attempted revenge killing or a killing in Michael's honor after he was convicted. There's a little bit of gray lines with that, but we will get into that after I discuss Michael Madison and the terrible, horrible things that he did. I'm gonna go ahead and put up a picture of Michael Madison and kind of start where his story started. I guess his notorious story anyway. So 3 women go missing between September of 2012 and July of 2013. All of the events occurred in the Cleveland, Ohio area, and I'm just gonna go ahead and go through each of the victims of Michael Madison in order that they occurred, and then later we're gonna talk a little bit about what happened in court, why experts feel Michael did these things. So the first individual to go missing was 28-year-old Shatisha Shaley, and she had last spoken with her family in September of 2012. So I'm going to go ahead and put up a picture of Shatisha right now. Shatisha was described as being goofy, outgoing, and sometimes a little bit of a loner, but Shatisha's mother knew something was terribly wrong when she did not show up for her brother's funeral. That was in December of 2012. So she disappeared in September, and there was some sort of tragic accident. I'm not really sure what happened to her brother, but she was not at his funeral in December. And Shatisha did apparently live life kind of on the edge. I do believe she had been arrested for something in her past, but when she missed her daughter's birthday, Shatisha's mother was set. She knew Shatisha was gone. Shatisha was unable to get to them somehow. One of those two things. And really, that's the end of the story for Shatisha's family. They just don't know where she is. They're trying to get police to look into her disappearance, but nothing is coming from it at all. So the next individual to go missing, 38-year-old Angela Deskins, and she went missing in June of 2013. She was last seen in Cleveland, Ohio, when a friend had dropped her off to an abandoned barbecue spot. It was noted she was possibly meeting up with Michael, and it wasn't until July 1st that she was reported missing. And I'm going to put a picture of Angela up now. Angela's brother was a major advocate for her. He took it public how much he was missing her, how much they were trying to find her, just trying to get somebody to come forward with any information regarding Angela's disappearance. It would later come out that Angela and her murderer, Michael, attended the same high school. So I know I haven't really spoken much about Michael at this point. He did have kind of a plethora of girlfriends, so around the same time that Angela had gone missing, one of Michael's girlfriends started noticing a really terrible stench coming from somewhere in Michael's home, and Michael kind of shrugged it off. He said that 2 raccoons had died in the front closet, and she pressed further because why would there be two dead raccoons in the front closet and you're not taking care of it? So Michael actually started to get a little bit nervous and like sweating about the situation, but ultimately she just noted the nervousness and left him alone. because he was getting a little irritated about her asking. So the last woman to go missing was Sherelda Terry, and at the young age of 18, she went missing on July 10th, 2013. So I'm going to put a picture up of Sherelda right now. And Sherelda was described by family as being intensely caring. She often checked in with her family, and she was a hugger. This was cute, but her family says that they even poked fun at her, saying that they would put her on a hug diet. Sherelda had met her killer a week prior when she exchanged phone numbers with him. The days that followed, the two texted back and forth, in which Michael lies to Sherelda, saying he was 25 years old and had no kids. He was in fact 35 and had 2 children. So it was these texting conversations that Michael suggested that Sherelda should come over to his place and they can meet up again. And Sherelda was a smart girl, so she declined this invitation. She said, quote, "We can hang out, but I'm not going to your house. I don't trust you like that yet." So she was taking precautions. She knew it was going to be kind of a sketchy situation to go over to someone you just met's house, especially alone. So Sherelda's last text message came on July 10th, 2013, or her last text messages, and she asked Michael if he wanted to hang out, and he agreed and replied with an address, and that's 152nd and Clare Street. It can be assumed this is where the two met up. I am not sure if that's his house or not, because she initially said she wouldn't hang out with him. I would assume it's not, because she wasn't going to hang out with him at his house. So they got together and things got violent at some point, which we will get into those things eventually, but not right now. And then Sherelda goes missing, and her family, they notice right away. A few days after Sherelda and Michael meet up, Michael's girlfriend, I think this is a different girlfriend, I'm not really sure, notices a bad scratch along Michael's shoulder. So this was actually the second injury this individual had noticed in the past year or so. He had a scratch on his nose, which both injuries are something he shrugged off. The nose injury he explained as when he was breaking up a fight between 2 people, 2 girls, and the other, he had a similar story about why he had a scratch on his shoulder. So the smell does not subside even with like all of this time passing. So it actually was this foul odor that would be the downfall of Michael Madison. I actually think it was more people beyond just the girlfriends noticing this terrible, horrible smell. So I'm not sure how he got called in, who called him in. Maybe it was a girlfriend. I kind of doubt it, but he gets called in for the smell, and police are not dumb. They know what certain things smell like, so they actually obtain a search warrant in regards to the smell. And let me tell you, Michael did not act like he was innocent. He barricaded himself in his home, which was actually his mother's home. So I think this was like a whole thing. It was like a whole incident. They had to talk him down. They had to get him out, and they had to try to do it safely, because if the smell is what they think it is, this is not necessarily a safe man to be dealing with. And they're trained to do this, and eventually they talk him down, they get him to come out. And the police begin a search, and they search in a garage that was leased to Michael. They search in the house, in particular the front closet, and a body was found in the garage that was leased to Michael, and there were 2 other bodies found in nearby vacant buildings. So in total, 3 bodies. It seemed he was attempting to fix this stench problem he was having by moving the bodies out of his home, but to buildings nearby, or even the garage that was leased to him. But it was obviously too late at that point. Police had already come to check out the situation, and they found bodies that he had wrapped in plastic and stashed in different places. So I'm gonna go ahead and include a picture of like part of the home Michael was living in. You can see it's not necessarily a super well kept home. It's like boarded up kind of. Again, it was his mother's home. I would assume he was just living there with his mother. A number of items were also taken as evidence, and they needed to build a case against Michael, and they needed DNA evidence that put these women in Michael's home. Pieces of evidence like pillows and such were taken, and it basically proved that Sherelda had definitely been inside the home of Michael Madison. Numerous items had Sherelda's DNA on them within the home. Further, blood-stained carpet proved to have Angela Deskin's DNA on it. The blood was Angela's, and the bodies, along with other items found, was plenty for police to feel that they could convict Michael, at least charge him and take him to trial. So Michael actually ended up writing a confession, so I'm going to go through what Michael had to say about these crimes, and it's really not super in detail. If you usually get like kind of grossed out by things like that, or it like upsets you, this isn't super in detail. But Michael's confession would be as follows. Michael confesses to choking a woman to death in October of 2012. This woman would have to be Shatisha Shealy, and he said he then went out drinking with Shatisha's body left in his home. Once he returned, he folded her body at the waist and put her in a few different trash bags, or put her in a bunch of trash bags. The body remained in the home for months before he moved her to like nearby the garage that he leased, not even inside the garage, in a bag outside the garage, like resting against the garage. And he was unable to recall Shatisha's name. Michael further says that Shatisha's killing was the only killing that he truly recalled. He knows that he was really drunk and high the night before he had woken up to a woman's dead body in bed next to him. This victim was most likely his most recent victim, Sherelda. Michael says he remembers absolutely nothing, not a single detail of Angela Deskin's murder or what he did to her body. He says he doesn't even remember meeting Angela, doesn't remember murdering Angela, doesn't remember the cleanup that followed or the disposal of her body. So I would have to assume he doesn't know Angela's name either. I think what's so frustrating about this is if you see this man's demeanor, especially in court, just the fact that he's like, yeah, I can't recall anything about this person, like, I probably didn't even do it, but he's obviously confessing to in some degree, but I just find it very, I don't know, like, he has a big ego, I'm not really sure. By 2016, the following are the offenses that the jury declared that Michael was guilty of, and it is a list. There are 14 counts. I kind of grouped them, so I'm not going to read 14 different things, but the following are those counts. So aggravated murder and kidnapping of Shatisha Shealy, aggravated murder and kidnapping of Angela Deskins, aggravated murder and kidnapping of Sherelda Terry, rape of Sherelda Terry, having a weapon under disability, 3 counts of gross abuse of a corpse on each woman. So there were some sources that did say he committed necrophilia on one or multiple of the women's bodies. It kind of sounds like it was all 3. There wasn't a lot of specifics about this. I did read the actual trial transcript, so I didn't see a ton about that. Michael Madison was sentenced to a life sentence for each murder that he committed and a prison sentence for each non-capital offense. So he is actually on death row, and his death sentence was upheld recently in July of 2020. So he appealed it clearly and lost, and he is still on death row right now. It was the father of a
I guess we're supposed to, in our hearts, forgive this clown who's touched our families, taken my child.
So after all of this, who is Michael Madison? Why did he do this? And what did the defense argue? There was a major point that the defense argued for Michael, and that was that he lived in an extremely abusive household growing up. They argued that Michael's mother beat him so severely that it caused him to be the violent man that he is today. They detailed the abuse by saying she would beat him, scald him with water, and force food down his throat until he would throw it back up. They further said that Michael's mother's boyfriend once beat him so horribly that he lost hearing. He lost the ability to hear in one of his ears. And you would think this would be able to be tested. So I don't know if that's something that they could prove, because I think you can do tests for that kind of a thing. But here's the thing, is there are people who do get abused as a child, even severely, who don't grow up and murder people. I understand the defense needing something. They can't just go to trial with nothing. It's just an argument that I don't think ever works. It's just kind of the argument you have to use because you need something. So he obviously still got convicted with a sentencing of the most severe sentencing he could have gotten. So it didn't work regardless of whether that was true or not. I do have to say there was no actual evidence proving that was true, including witnesses that also said that. I'm not saying it's not true, but he did kill these people, so I don't honestly think it really matters at this point. What is so important about the defense's argument, though, is what happened to Michael's allegedly abusive mother in 2019. So this is where I talked about kind of an honor killing happening. It's kind of unknown why this even occurred, because the individual who murdered Michael's mother, the link between Michael and this killer, it's messy. It's not very known. I'm sure it's known by some people, but not very public. So on June 22nd, 2019, Diane Madison, Michael Madison's mother, was found stabbed to death in her home. Not only this, but 3 of Diane's grandchildren were also injured by the same attacker. All 3 grandchildren turn out fine, but Diane does not make it. It was around midnight when 20-year-old Jalen Plummer attacked 4 individuals in their sleep. The children were able to escape to a neighbor's and call 911, and Jalen was found hiding in the shower with bloodied hands. He was treated for his injuries and then questioned. Here's the major part. Jalen was also a grandchild to Diane, meaning the 3 grandchildren he attacked were his siblings. So I had to get out the family tree. I'm like, wait a second, wouldn't that make them the nieces and nephews of, they would either be the children or the nieces and nephews of Michael Madison. They're not the children, but I think they may not be close or really even know Michael, but family tree wise, it would make them the nieces and nephews, right? I get so confused with that kind of a thing. Jalen would stand trial after being declared competent for trial. And remember, he's young, 20 years old. An adult, but young in the grand scheme of things. It was argued that he may have been high on PCP and marijuana, but no true motive has been disclosed. But there are obviously lots and lots of theories in regards to why Jalen carried out these crimes and how it's likely not a coincidence, but but it still could be. I think the question that a lot of people are asking that Jalen is not answering is, was this random? Was this because you were high on drugs? Did you do this in honor of Michael because he was abused? I don't know. It just depends on the relationship there. And this is fairly recent, so there's no real... I mean, Jalen isn't talking, and I don't think they've really given him a reason to, or at least made it public. So it remains a mystery to this day in 2022. There was never any evidence, like I said before, that Diane Madison had abused her son or any other children. So Diane Madison lost her life. Shatisha, Angela, and Sherelda all lost their lives. And I know I will forever see Van Terry's just face of desperation as he lashed out against Michael. May they all rest in peace, and I hope the families are at least feeling a little more sense of peace with Michael's conviction and sentencing. I hope they're able to grow and heal with time. So with that, I hope everybody is staying